we can get all that ready and get all the social stuff out. The social goodness. Let's see here. I'm excited for tonight's episode. There we go.
I can't believe all of our teams are still in this.
That's why I'm excited. That is why I am so excited.
And 2 of the teams have survived the first knockout round.
Let's see here. Yeah, give me a day. So.
We're gonna have an MLSFI derby, Reed. Come on.
No, it's probably not going to happen. I mean, we have beaten Portland before, but okay. And where?
I can see FC Cincinnati just like we're just buggering into this 0-0 and advance to a PKs.
That's what Vancouver
2 teams that just want a bunker. Love it.
But how about that kid last night? Or did you guys not stay up and watch it?
I watched it. I watched your game. The last part of your game.
Yeah.
I watched like Vancouver highlights of Vancouver's last 2 games, including in Seattle, and he's had some games because I don't think he's let anything in yet since he came on in Seattle.
Yeah, I don't think he has. And I don't know if you guys saw my tweet. He guessed right 3 of the 4 times last night in the penalty shootout.
Yeah, he did well.
And I mean, the only one that beat him, or that he didn't guess right, was Pulido's, but that was just nasty anyway. That's not fair to do that to a 21-year-old.
Yeah.
There is that. Okay. I've got the YouTube tweeted out. We've got the chat. I'll load that up so I can monitor chat. That's muted. Live chat. All right. Get a drink. Well, if you guys are ready, we'll get started. I guess I should
Let's go.
probably not have my entire desktop being shared. That might look better. There we go. That looks better. That looks better. What did I have up there? All kinds of stuff. All right. Let's see here. Okay. Hello and welcome to episode 24 of the MLS Fantasy Insider, part 3 of our MLS is Back Tournament Fantasy Takeaway Series. This episode is brought to you by Hopscotch, the official training game of Sporting Kansas City. Brought to you by MLSFantasyBoss.com and the amazing Patreon community of the MLS Fantasy Insider. You guys are awesome, and I am just so blessed that you are part of this community and that I can be part of the community with you. I'm your host, Reed Connolly from MLSFantasyBoss.com, and tonight I am joined by my usual partners in fantasy, Mr. Michael Denton and Mr. Blaine Riffle. How are you fellas doing tonight?
I'm
Doing well.
tired.
I can imagine. I can imagine. So, what we're talking about tonight, for those who are tuning in either live with us or on SoundCloud later on, is we're talking about fantasy takeaways from the MLS is Back tournament, just to help people with this sort of extended preseason that we have. We are just going to be talking about the final games of the group stage tonight because a whole lot has been going on with the knockout stage, and we're going to cover those games in our next podcast because there'll be a nice little break to let us do that. But I am not going to force Mike and Blaine to wait 2 weeks to talk about things that I'm sure they would like to share about. So, guys, before we get into reviewing the final games of the group stage, I will let you talk just a couple of minutes about the successes that your teams have had, because all 3 of our teams surprisingly made it to the Sweet 16.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I know Blaine's having a good time because his team also advanced into the next phase.
True.
But I had watched New York City beat Toronto and Patrick Mullins score. So the fact that I get to talk about that this week and next week is pretty awesome. It takes 2 weeks to fully savor the brilliance of Patrick Mullins' goal. Yeah, I mean, New York City, when everyone expected them to not win against Toronto, blew them out. I don't know what it is. It seems like whenever New York City is expected to be out, that's when they do well. Maybe it's like the David Villa thing. Whenever we picked David Villa, he would score. He wouldn't score. We didn't have him. Then that's when he would score. Maybe it's related somehow.
Yeah.
Yep.
I don't know. But it was nice to see them actually play really, really well for the first time all tournament.
Yeah, no, that was a wild game, and potentially sets up a MLS Fantasy Insider Derby, depending on how Cincinnati does against Portland. Which, as I have said from the beginning, I have very low expectations. I am shocked, as we'll get into later today. But we have beaten Portland before, so, and I was there for it. But Blaine, I won't drone on about that. You have most likely the most interesting, or not interesting, but the most exciting moment to relive with us right now.
Yeah, penalties are always a great thing. I know,
especially
Mike,
for your team.
Yeah, I know, Mike. Congrats on getting your win when nobody thought you could do it. Sporting fans have the other agony that when we're supposed to get a big blowout win, we drag it all the way 0-0 penalties, can't score a goal on 30-something shots. Like, that game was nuts. And yeah, it came down to penalties with the best PK stopper in league history, bringing home the win on that one. Saved 2 of 4 at the end, but I mean, all things considered, the breakout star of that game was Hassel, the 21-year-old homegrown goalkeeper for Vancouver. I think Mike pointed it out before the show. He is on a clean sheet streak through this entire tournament. Since he's gotten in, he has not conceded a goal yet. Kansas City just bombarded him last night, and he was at everything, and even went right 3 of the 4 times in the penalty shootout, which is huge for a young goalkeeper. You don't beat Melia in one of those, and that's unfortunate for him. I think if he was playing against any other goalkeeper, he would have been through that penalty shootout and gone on to the next round. But yeah, that game finished up about 12:15 my time, so we went on into the next day, and if you've ever watched a knockout penalty shootout for your team, you don't go to bed for another 2 hours after that. Like, it's just the hype and the nerves. Like, it was a long night. It was fun. Glad we're moving on, but really sad to see Vancouver's goalkeeper out of this tournament because he was something else.
Did you join the group watch to be on one of the virtual bulletin boards? Big screen boards?
No, I haven't done that yet.
Oh, you should have. That was your chance. Could have been fun. Could have been fun. But that's it. That's all we're going to talk about from the Sweet 16. I guess I'm not supposed to say Sweet 16. I guess I'm supposed to say round of 16. But I mean, I'm in the heart of SEC country right here, and it's just natural for me to call this the Sweet 16. So that's what you're going to get. That's how it is. Okay, week 3. I don't know, round 3, whatever it is. The final games of the group stage that we have not yet covered. We're starting with Philadelphia versus Orlando. We're going to use our same format that we have for the past 2 podcasts. I'll cover the final score, who got those goals and assists, and then we'll just cover some of the high stats and the high players that tend to be fantasy relevant moving on. So let's start. As I said, Philadelphia versus Orlando, 1-1 final. Goals from Ilsinho with assist by Bedoya and Aronson, and then we had a goal by Pereira at Orlando, and assisted by Nani. So from this game, there was not much going on. That was an interesting theme to see, or just interesting takeaways from all the games, was who played hard, who slacked off, even if they did or didn't need to make it. And this was definitely a game where the 2 teams were moving on, and they didn't push. They played, it was fine, but there was no huge desire to, I guess, ruin what was going to happen coming up in Sweet 16. So 1-1 was the final. Both teams advanced on. Shots, Philadelphia 12, Orlando 10, so fairly even there. Philadelphia outcrossed Orlando 26-18. Possession fairly even, 46-54 in favor of Orlando. Key players, We have, of course, Bedoya over at Philadelphia, Shabilko, McKenzie on defense, Monteiro defense and crosses. A lot of the same names that we've been seeing already. Some of the key players that you're going to be gravitating to anyway in fantasy on Orlando. Nani, Perea, and Jansen. Jansen was a pretty good defensive option. I think... I don't know if you have this loaded up, Mike. I had this just a second ago. I think Jansen is at $7 million, so he's not very budget friendly, but he had some pretty good defensive stats right there. So if you are looking for some options, he's one you could consider. But Nani was one that definitely stood out. I think that's going to be your go-to player at Orlando. Shots, crosses. This is the guy that's really going to be the go-to. What did you guys think of this game?
I mean, I think you summarized it perfectly. They were moving on. They didn't really have to do too much. I think a draw was fine for them. They've both had exceptional tournaments, winning the first 2 games. So, I mean, once they got the draw, Orlando knew it would win the group, and I don't think Philadelphia cared too much.
Yeah, pretty much the same. This looked like one of those Orlando games where they could park the bus a little bit and know they would win the group. Looking at the bracket and the way things came out and where everybody ended up, I don't think either team really cared too much what happened here. Both of them won their first knockout round. I know we'll talk about those games a little bit later, but I mean, they both got favorable draws for them going forward. I think Philadelphia probably got on the easier side of the bracket, so finishing second place in the group was not necessarily the worst thing in the world for them. And so this was just 2 teams didn't want to overexert themselves, didn't want to risk injuries, knew what was going on, and both of them played a pretty good game. It wasn't the most exciting game because they didn't have a whole lot to play for.
In general, fantasy takeaways for Philadelphia are more important to me than for Orlando. Still not... I mean, Orlando has definitely surprised a lot of people in this tournament, but Philadelphia is a team that had momentum from last year, has a lot of players at a lot of positions. I mean, Shabilko is under $9 million as a forward who could be an excellent option. Monteiro is under $9 million as a midfielder who was fantastic in bonus point production last year as well. And then on the defensive side, there's some really affordable defensive players right here. I mean, Wagner's at 6.5, but everybody else is lower than that, and there have been some decent performances right there. Like McKenzie is 5.1, and he had a great game. So we already talked about Monteiro. So I think Philly is the key team here to keep an eye on as we go into the fantasy season. Moving on to Toronto versus New England. So this game 0-0 is the final, and I couple of takeaways. New England did not field an A lineup at all. Some of that was due to injuries. Carles Heel was a boot, actually, so he's one to keep an eye on. But New England did not field an A team right here. Josie came back into the lineup late in the game, but both keepers made some big saves. But other than that, this game didn't have a whole lot to it. Toronto outshot New England 14-10. New England outcrossed Toronto 11-23, and Toronto outpossessed New England 60-40. Key players, of course, as usual, right here, Pozuelo continues to be the same player in fantasy that we expect him to be. Aro and Larea did well on defense, so if you are looking for Toronto as defense, you do still have some options, but they tend to be in the more expensive range, so you may not be able to do much with them. In New England, Fagundes has done well. I think that's been the biggest fantasy takeaway for me from this tournament so far, is that Fagundes is actually starting to put up some decent numbers that we've always hoped Fagundes has done in the past. Consistency is going to be that issue going forward. Then, of course, on defense, Farrell has done well. He's a fantastic fantasy defender over the past several years. Kessler has done well on defense, and then Rowe also did very well with crossing numbers. So he is back home in New England. Farrell is 6.9, but if you're going to look at someone like Kessler, if he starts, he's 4.7. So after Farrell, you can find some fantastic budget options here on New England if they're able to keep up some kind of form. Did you get a chance to watch this, Blaine?
No, I didn't get a chance to watch this one so much. The one thing I like to note, because this was game 3 for New England, was that was their second clean sheet of the tournament,
Mm-hmm.
and Higuain only put 1 goal by him, and that was kind of one of those fluky things right after he came on. I mean, really well worked. New England's defense looks really solid right now. This Toronto team didn't rotate quite as heavily, and I mean, they were coming at them. New England locked it down and didn't give
Mm-hmm.
up that goal. It was enough to get them through to the knockout round. A defense that I'm going to be looking at a lot more going forward, just because I think they've got it. I know I was a big Turner fan last year, playing in Show League and some other things. Turner was one of those names that just kept popping up on my radar, and I think we've got to give them a little more credit going forward. They've got some playmakers and the ability to hold the ball up, which does help your clean sheet chances. They're not under siege all the time like they have been in years past. Toronto, we know what they've got. We know what they can do going forward, and to keep a clean sheet in this type of game is huge for New England.
Anything to add, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if y'all have started to look at GameFlow, which is a Twitter account that was started by the American Analysis guys, and it shows kind of XG over the course of the game, and it's really good. And it shows that like basically Toronto just kind of took like small little chances throughout the game, accumulated to about 1 expected goals. New England had 1.79. We talked a little bit about this last week. New England's problem this tournament, even with or without Heel, wasn't creating chances, it was finishing them. They pretty much underperformed their expected goals the entire tournament. So that's something that I think you can look forward to in New England, that, you know, if they start converting more of those chances, which statistically they should, they'll be a good value going forward. But I agree with what Blaine said about the defense. The defense looks fine. Holding Toronto to just 1 expected goal and the chances that they gave up, that's pretty good.
Okay, moving on to Atlanta versus Columbus. My group, the complete, I guess a story of 2 teams. Atlanta completely collapsing in this tournament, and Columbus rising to the top above all teams so far. Final is 0 Atlanta, 1 Columbus, with an early goal by Mokhtar, assisted by Valenzuela. The Crew were missing some of their main pieces in this game, but they were still able to get the win. And they ended up perfect. 9 points, never gave up a goal, had a fantastic goal differential number because of my team. But this was a massive failure for Atlanta. And we all know what's already happened with DeBoer out. So that's the biggest fantasy takeaway in general, is you could pretty much throw away everything that we've said before now, because if they get a new coach, when they get a new coach, it's all who knows what. Formations may change, style may change. Without Joseph, you don't know what's going to happen. So that's the biggest fantasy takeaway overall. Otherwise, Atlanta outshot Columbus 15-9. They outcrossed Columbus 21-11, and about even possession, 55-45 in favor of Atlanta. 2 bright spots you can take from Atlanta with key players. Pitti had great shot numbers, great pass numbers, great cross numbers. But if these guys aren't going to score, they're not players you want on your team in fantasy. They're just too expensive, and you can look someplace else. Lennon also had some good numbers here. On Columbus' side, it's the same people who we've been talking about. Columbus is a team that you need to be picking up 3 players from almost every week. I would say they, depending on how they do in the rest of this tournament, I mean, they're almost every week they have players who can perform against teams of high caliber. But we'll see. Otherwise, Diaz did well. Awful did good. Mensah did well. Awful Mensah with their defensive numbers. Santos did well with his crossing numbers. Zelarayan was out, so just when he's back in this game, the depth and the players that they have are just so potent. They're players fantasy that you want, but they don't suffer from that trap that teams like Houston have in the past, where there's so many players and it's bouncing around that you don't know who's going to get the scores. Is that Columbus has skill, but you can get consistent numbers from a lot of players. Did you guys end up being as shocked as I was of Atlanta's just crash?
By this game, not really. Playing the Columbus defense, like Adam John still didn't do anything. He got 45 minutes in this one, didn't register a shot. They're not giving any service to a guy like. I think what surprises me more is, like, I know Adam John's not your premier forward, but he's a big body. He can go up and get headers. Was he with he was with San Jose for a while, wasn't he?
Well, he was with Columbus when they beat Atlanta in the playoffs.
That's right. Yeah, he was with Columbus. I mean, he's 6'3". He is not a small guy. He should be one of those imposing forces. And when you've got Pitti, when you've got Barco, when you've got some of these guys around him, you would expect them to send some crosses in and get him on his head. I mean, they put up 21 crosses in that game. Where is the service for Adam John here? You've got a big striker. I don't know if this is a coaching issue, which that's out the window now. We get to see what they're going to do going forward, because this got DeBoer the sack. But how do you take a big body? I mean, we talked about it with Josie Altidore some. You know, if nothing else, or go back to the old San Jose Bash brothers with Lenhart and Gordon. You put balls high in the air and you let them go up and get them. You let them go get a couple of shots that way. You keep defenses on their toes. Atlanta's not doing that. They're not giving any service to anybody. It looks like Barco, everything's playing between Pitti and Barco, trying to get shots for a couple of their midfielders, which isn't working. I don't think it's going to work with this team. Jurgen Damm, when he starts, may fix it, but they're doing a lot, but they're not creating a lot when they do this. I mean, crosses are one thing. They're good for fantasy bonus points, but nobody's getting on the end of them, and nobody's doing what they need to with them. It's just, I think that's the biggest surprise, is you've got all these quality players and they're not doing anything with the ball, but they have the ball. They get in dangerous spots. They're not producing anything, and that baffles me.
Right, it's the team that's set up for Joseph Martinez. I mean, they're designed to get the ball, to cross it in, to get it to Joseph, to have him work his magic. And you're right, Adam John can't do that. So, but I mean, they're still playing like they have Joseph, and they don't have Joseph.
Yeah, but I mean, you would still. I mean, because I'm looking at the expected goals, they only got .72, and this was a match that they had to win. You know, I guess the big question going forward is firing DeBoer a statement from Atlanta's front office that this team is unacceptable and they're ready to make big changes to get back to the glory days of a few years ago? Or is this a statement that they think that this team, as composed now, should be winning? It's just a little odd to fire anyone after this tournament because of, you know, kind of the weird extenuating circumstances that go into this tournament. If you think Frank DeBoer is your man at the beginning of 2020, I don't know how this game could change, or these few games can change that, as bad as they were for Atlanta. But that's a big question, because I think Atlanta needs something else. If they're going to come back to play, you know, this year and the regular season goes on, as MLS is planning it right now, I mean, I think Atlanta needs to sign someone to be really competitive and to be an offensive threat, because as of right now, they're just not.
I mean, I think
know that Frank DeBoer a new coach changes that.
I think the statement is that they wanted more from Frank DeBoer. Let me start this over. I think you're right that they think this team should be doing better than they are. I mean, what they've dropped into Pitti, what they've dropped into Barco, that even without Joseph, these are players who should still be able to be stars, who should still be able to be players that can be built around for a team, and that it just looks like Frank DeBoer wasn't willing or able to break that mold of what they do with Joseph, and that to me it seems like they just want someone who is going to use the players they have in a different creative way to get the best out of who they have, which they believe should be enough to be way more competitive than they are right now.
Yeah, and I can understand that, but I mean, if your starting striker is Adam John, you're going to have trouble. You know, I mean, I would point to New York City before they got Hebert. Before
Sure.
You had an actual striker, there was struggles to score. And everyone was calling for Dome's head, and then he actually got a striker, and poof, all of a sudden all the issues were gone, and they were scoring as usual. Not having a striker is a huge problem. And right now, I mean, Atlanta United doesn't have a striker.
Mm-hmm.
and I get that, but even not having a striker, you need your striker to get a couple of shots a game to get involved. You can't score if you can't shoot, and if you've got playmakers like Barco and Pity, I expect them to facilitate for whoever is up front, for whoever is playing that striker role, and at least get them a couple of opportunities to try to break on the score sheet. I don't know if Adam John had a single shot in this entire tournament. When your starting striker doesn't have a single shot, some of it could be your striker that's not very good, but some of that comes back to you're not feeding your striker the ball in a position where he can do it. The more I look at this roster, there's some good names on here. Some guys that have a little bit to prove, some younger guys who are stepping up right now. But Barco and Martinez are two names that they expect to take over these games. And they're putting up good numbers, but they're not creating for anybody else. It just seems to be almost a two-man show right now. And if your two-man show's not doing it, they've got to start getting everybody else involved. I don't see where this team is working together. Maybe that is management issues. I don't know. I don't know what DeBoer was telling this team to do, how he was telling them to play. But when
we know what this really is. This is Mike's lobby for Patrick Mullins to Atlanta. That's what it is. That's what's going on right
Say
here.
that. I've thought about that, but don't make the New Orleans boy go to Atlanta. No.
Atlanta hires Dome, and then Patrick Mullins comes down to start for him.
There we go. There it is. Let's move on to the next game. This is
They're not smart enough to do that.
Montreal versus DC, and I mean it was pretty even. That's an exciting thing you can say, or a fair thing I think you can say about this game. It was a pretty even game for two teams that have had struggles recently, and in the end, the magic of Higuain did not come through for DC as it has earlier in this tournament. Tighter got the only goal of the game, and that's all she wrote, and Montreal advanced, so good for them. Still, DC outshot Montreal 12-7. Montreal was out crossed by DC as well, 18-14, and then Montreal though ended up with the majority of possession, but it was fairly even, 55-45. Key players, Bohan on offense, he got the assist with Tighter. Wanyama on defense had some really good numbers. Brault Gilliard on defense also had some good numbers, so potentially some options on Montreal with defense. These guys are cheap if they end up playing. I just don't have a lot of faith in Montreal fantasy-wise, but they got points, and in this situation they would have done well. They would have gotten a good score. On DC, pretty much the same people you're looking. They're having some struggles with scoring. Brillant is doing well on defense. Some of your same guys there. Gressel is still doing very well with his crosses. That's exactly what he's built for. So if you are looking for an offensive player at times with DC, to me it looks like Gressel is one of the better options just because of the bonus point potential. But I'm not big on DC right now. Anything to add for this, guys? Mike?
Nope. I mean, I think you're right. DC struggled offensively all tournament. They very much needed Higuain magic to do anything. This is a team that probably needs a signing in order to be competitive offensively. Even Gressel's crossing, if you get someone on the end of it, then I think it'd be a much more valuable fantasy option. And I mean, Montreal kind of struggled all tournament to create chances, which really isn't surprising. They're still struggling to replace Piatti. Tighter's pretty much been their only source of offense, including with a number of PKs.
Right.
Which is weird considering they scored 3 goals in the last game in Toronto, but 2 of those were PKs.
Right. 2 of his 3 goals have been PKs. So yeah, this is his first open field game. Cool.
Yeah.
Anything else, Blaine? I know you've covered Montreal some in the past.
Yeah. Really like what I'm seeing from Kyoto right here. I think he's found a good home here. I think he's gonna do some damage for us. But yeah, echo what you guys said. DC just looks bad right now. No creativity. This was a must-win game for DC to try to have a chance. I don't even think a draw was going to be good enough at this point. And 12 shots, but only three on target. It's just they didn't do enough. I didn't see enough creativity or spark to break down what's not been the greatest Montreal side in this tournament. There was nothing there, and that kind of shocked me. I know a lot of people were talking about DC being a dark horse to come out of the group stage and do some damage in the knockout rounds. One of those teams that has a ton of talent. I mean, MLSFI is back. Federico Higuain came on. He gave the magic, but he was about the only one. And then Ola Kimara, who I don't know that we've talked about this entire tournament because he's done absolutely nothing. That's probably the most shocking thing there is he has played 20 minutes in a must-win game, and he is the guy that Columbus counted on, and LA Galaxy paid a ton of money for to get him out of. They traded Zardes over to get him out of Columbus, and I think they paid some and sent Zardes to Columbus. And you look at what Zardes has done since that trade and what Ola Kimara has done since that trade. We know who won that one.
For sure. Especially in your heart, Blaine. Especially in your heart. Excuse me. Next game, RSL versus Sporting Kansas City, ends up 0-2 in Sporting Kansas City favor. Goals by Russell, assisted by Polito, and Gerso, also assisted by Polito. And this was just a good old-fashioned dominating performance by Sporting Kansas City. So I'll let Blaine speak mostly about that. On the stats-wise, Sporting Kansas City outshot RSL 10-5. Cross is about the same, but it was in favor of RSL 10-7. And then RSL had a little bit more possession, 58-42%. Not a lot to pull here from players with RSL. They have some defensive options. Glad and Toya were definite stands out here. But RSL's players are expensive on defense, so I don't actually know excuse me, if they are worth the investment fantasy under the right situation, of course. But a lot of them are in that mid-7 range, and that's kind of pricey, I think, for these players. On Sporting Kansas City's side, a lot of the usual suspects that we've already talked about. Blaine, I'll let you take it over here and talk about your boys.
Johnny Russell with the first minute really set the tone for this game. We could sit back a little bit more. Russell's looking better as he gets more time. He's been injured. He was injured to start the season, kind of been getting back to full fitness through this tournament. Polito's the real deal. Probably more creative than he is a goal scorer right now, which is shocking for a Premier number 9 signing this year, but I'll take it. Gerso, kind of playing some of that super sub role again, but looks really good. Watch his price to inflate as we go, so he may carry himself out, but he may not be starting every game. But the bigger takeaway here is just how strong the defense was in this game. RSL didn't get a ton of shots, but we didn't let them have those because we could sit back a little bit. The biggest news here is Matt Beasler was rotated to the bench, and we thought this may have been just to get a rest. Graham Smith is playing alongside Zusi, and Punchet switched sides. That may not be a fluke, like give a guy a rest type of thing. This defensive switch seems to have really helped the team out a lot. They looked a lot more solid. That was the post-game. Vermes was praising how good the defense was. The goals came, but he was praising just how strong the defense looked through that whole game and didn't give up a ton of good chances. And that's been a problem for Sporting since really the start of 2019. They would sit back and they would give up good chances, and eventually one would go in. They didn't even give up the good chances here. As far as RSL goes, I talked about it a little bit in the before the game with a couple of friends, but RSL right now goes the way Rusnak goes. And Rusnak didn't play this game, and they had almost nothing creatively. That, to me, is going to be the biggest indicator on what I want to do. I like some of these guys. Krylock is good. Sam Johnson is fantastic once he's there. But if Rusnak is not in that lineup, I am not taking anybody RSL unless it's a good defensive matchup for him. There's not enough creativity without Rusnak there, and I don't think any of them are worth the money, even some of the cheaper options, because they don't have it. They missed that spark without Rusnak.
Good pointing out Smith on defense for Sporting Kansas City. 4.5 defender would be a steal for fantasy if he does start. And I had a hard time not realizing he was not Matt Beasler because I would see him run by or they'd get some shots. I'm like, is that? They'd said it. That's not. He looks a lot like Matt Beasler. So.
And honestly, Smith is widely considered the most athletic center back on this team.
Yeah, he did well last night too.
Mm-hmm.
All right, next game. Ooh, the best game. Cincinnati versus the New York Red Bulls. Best for Mike because the Red Bulls lost. Best for me because Cincinnati won, and Blaine is just the odd man out. 2-0 is the final score in favor of Cincinnati. Goals by Yuya Kubo and an own goal by Velo off of a fantastic corner kick by Madunyanen. And wow, just wow. That's all I can say. Completely unexpected. Thank you to everyone who sent me messages on Twitter during this game. I got several of them. It was very, very touching that people were actually, I think Ashley said when they scored the second goal, she looked to her husband and said, I'm going to have to send something to Reed to see if he's okay. And I will be honest, I didn't even cheer when the second goal happened because I was just in shock staring at the screen of just, what? So, yeah, this was wild. Great to have these two results for Cincinnati. Definitely helps the team. Makes you wonder if they finally have a coach in Yapstam who can get some of that defensive shape that they were trying to get last year. Whatever you can call last year, but at least they're trying to resolve the defensive issues going forward to just make what they can out of this year. Whatever happened, it worked. Throwing 11 guys back, I guess, does that. But Cincinnati was outshot by the Red Bulls 4-19. The most lopsided crossing numbers I have ever seen. Cincinnati had 4 crosses in this game. The New York Red Bulls had 51 crosses in this game. I say this because I'm focusing on this because a lot of the Red Bulls players had 6, 7, 8 crosses, and that would have been 2 to 3 bonus points easy for these players. I don't think this is a trend because we didn't see this necessarily from Columbus. We didn't see this for sure from Atlanta, but they were down 2 men. But keep an eye on it because if you have teams playing against Cincinnati fantasy-wise, if they're going to be giving up massive amounts of crosses, that could really help some of your wingbacks or your wing midfielders as well. So, but keep an eye on that because that was it was stupid, the difference right there. And then, of course, Red Bulls outpossessed Cincinnati 68-32. The players that came away with the best points from Cincinnati, of course, Yakubo, but the defenders had a lot of bonus points, which is just what you can expect from how they're playing right now. I don't have any faith fantasy-wise, though, to rely on Cincinnati because it's just they're still too young. They still have so much against them that just no. But the stats from this game, the defenders did fantastic. Red Bulls, there was no one to really point at. They weren't able to break down Cincinnati to get the goals. Like I said, they had people with massive cross numbers, but I think that's a fluke more than what you can expect from the Red Bulls game in, game out, or for Cincinnati to allow. So I don't have really anyone to point out from this game for the Red Bulls. What about you guys?
I think this is one of those, honestly, with the last 2 games for Cincy, this is one of those tactical matchups that we can look at going forward. Yapstam seems to have him playing a bend but don't break defense right now, and that's huge for fantasy. Like, I love to see that because you hit it on the head with the wingbacks. Those guys are going to come out, and those guys are going to get more crossing numbers. Those guys are going to have more license to go forward. Bend but don't break. You absorb a lot of pressure. Your defenders, especially your cheaper ones, are going to be viable for bonus points because when you face 50 crosses in a game, when you start adding in those clearances and interceptions on those, you're going to start packing in a few extra bonus points. Maybe you get a clean sheet, maybe you don't, but you could start theoretically packing in enough bonus points to rival another clean sheet player. And so it makes it interesting depending on price, but teams going at them are going to become super valuable in different ways. This may not be the defense you want to take your starting forward who is dependent on goals, because it looks like Cincy may not be giving up the goals as much anymore. This may be the one where you want all the facilitators and go grab as many bonus points as you can and you can do really, really well on just those bonus points alone for some of the facilitators and your wingbacks, which is where we tend to struggle to find bonus points and defensive bonus points like that. So, interesting tactical matchup. You'll have to know your teams a little better here, but that opens up a ton of possibilities and a ton of cheaper options to really shine through against Cincinnati, even if they're not getting goals and assists going. It's going to be fun to watch the rest of the season and see how fantasy scores come up against Cincinnati, even if Cincinnati's not giving up goals.
Anything to add, Mike?
Just I would say that Cincinnati, even though they got 2 goals, they only created 0.31 expected goals. Although part of that is because own goals don't really translate very well to expected goals, and it was a really good header corner kick by Meduninen. But they're still struggling. They're still absorbing a lot of shots against them. But the good thing is they're not as high quality opportunities as we've seen in the past. So that's the positive thing looking forward for Cincinnati, as well as just a boost of confidence. We talked about how you felt, Reed. I think it's just a good thing to have a good story for Cincinnati from this tournament, regardless of what happens when they play Portland. That's just nice for them to have. But in order to become really fantasy viable outside of the defenders, they're going to need a lot more because they're just not generating enough chances. But on the Red Bull side, they didn't score since the game against Atlanta. 2 shutouts against Columbus and FC Cincinnati. We've had a trouble fantasy-wise of the kind of similar Houston Dynamo problem of you don't know where the goals are coming from. And right now, that's nowhere for the Red Bulls, so they need something else.
Next game, Colorado versus Minnesota. Interesting game. This one was very back and forth, and congrats to Colorado for putting up a great game because they were not going to advance regardless of what happened here. So it was. I think this was a great game. I didn't get to see it. I just got to catch the highlights, and I kind of wish I had because it looked like a good game. Final score 2-2. Draw on this one. Goals by Kimara and Lewis for Colorado, assisted by Benze for Kamara's goal, and then 2 goals brace for Ethan Finlay, assisted by Gregus on the first one, and then Mettener and Gregus on the second one. This is an interesting result because I know there were times a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, back in Columbus when we had Higuain and Miram and Finlay all at Columbus. There were times when Finlay did have some great spurts, and he's done pretty well during this tournament, so I could see this transitioning into Ethan Finlay is going to be a great fantasy option. Maybe. Is my fantasy. Maybe. The most important thing to note from this game is that Kevin Molino did not play, and Kevin Molino has been doing very well in this game as well, and that's the player I'd be looking toward more for fantasy because Ethan Finlay has been much more sporadic in fantasy history. And even though Molino has not had the greatest time, a lot of it he's been injured and trying to recoup and never really getting back into his stride. So if this tournament has let Kevin Molino get back into his stride, that is an excellent thing for Minnesota, especially since they were missing some components for this team. Otherwise, fairly even with the numbers, 14-18 with shots in favor of Minnesota, 21-24 and crosses in favor of Minnesota, and then 45-55 with possession in favor of Minnesota. Colorado, I think, is the biggest fantasy takeaway from here because they have some quality players. A lot of them are pretty affordable, and I think Colorado could have some good differential players going forward. Rubio had great shots. Acosta had great shots, which is another player you're going to want to keep an eye on who did well in the past and has struggled a little bit. Kimara had great shots. Drew Moore, Rosenberry, great on defense, have usually been fairly affordable right there. And then on Minnesota, they have some great defensive options with Gasper and Boxall. Mettener is always great for the offensive side, and I already covered the question mark surrounding Ethan Finlay. What did you guys think about this game?
Oh, I loved this game.
Yeah.
This was everything I wanted from a game. This helped Sporting a lot too. At the top of the group, but no, I don't mind Colorado. A couple of former Kansas City players out there. I love seeing the turnaround. The underdog story is always fun for me. Um, this is a team that really had nothing to play for other than 3 points in the regular season. And I mean, they got a point for the regular season standings. Um, I hope. I think the big takeaway from the tournament comes from this game. This gave every group game something to play for. Even if you were out of the tournament, you still had something to play for. And it's like Atlanta in their last game. They crashed out horribly, but they came at it because they needed 3 points. Columbus didn't just roll over and die because they wanted the 3 points. Like this was huge for Colorado to come out and play. Jonathan Lewis is at 7.5, looking like a super sub. He hasn't been starting, but he has been coming off the bench and putting in great work. Definitely somebody, if we see these inflated budgets, to start to keep an eye on. Throw him on the bench, stash him there. If he comes in late, great. You take those points. Diego Rubio put up 4 shots in this one as well. It seems like they're Colorado's creating chances, and they did this one without Jack Bryce this time.
Yeah,
and that's a big one. I think he was on a red card suspension for this one, so he wasn't there. And Colorado still looked really good. They've got some depth here. I don't think they're one of those elite teams in MLS yet, but they've got some depth that even if they're missing a few players, you can still expect them to perform fairly well. And then switch sides. I mean, this is a Minnesota team that's struggling a little bit. Missing Opara may be part of the problem. I think Molino's kind of the engine of this team. They paid good money to get him out of Orlando, and they really need that to pay off soon. And when he's playing, he looks like he's worth the $600,000 they paid for him. I think he makes Finley better. Finley's one of those guys I always love seeing him play because he's capable of doing so much. I just wish he would do it more consistently. And then the rest of the team around him, I mean, Grey Goose is still just fantastic. Set pieces, definitely somebody you always have to keep an eye on. He's getting shots. He takes corners. He does set pieces. He's involved all the time. But this was just a fun game. There were tons of fantasy points to be had. This is one of those games I may score the whole thing as I start scoring my draft league stuff, just because I want to see how this one shaped out, because this one looked like fun.
Mm-hmm. Anything to add, Mike?
Just that I think the Colorado Rapids are a much better team with Jonathan Lewis on the field, but they seem to be having the same problem New York City is, which they can't figure out how to get the kid to start. I don't know if it's I mean, for us, it was a durability issue. He just couldn't last all 90 minutes. And it seems like Colorado's having the same problem, which is a shame because every time he comes on, it seems like he scores or is very dangerous. But I mean, he's 7.5 midfielder in fantasy. He's someone I think fantasy players are going to want to start and want to see get opportunities because he usually takes advantage of them. But, it's always so much harder if he's not starting. But then again, if we're getting 5 subs a game, maybe you're more comfortable with that. Well,
sure.
So that's something to kind of keep in mind as we go forward.
Yeah, he's one of those. I've heard that, and I actually drafted him in my draft league hoping he would do more. I watched some of their preseason stuff, and I thought he looked really good. And I mean, there's a reason why I drafted him, and he's showing it to us. But I wonder if he just does better when he's got Rubio or Nomley or Benezet out there running at defenses for 60, 70 minutes, and then he comes in and exploits those tired legs.
We'll see. Next game is Chicago versus Vancouver, which at the beginning of this game, well, it shouldn't have even happened at the beginning of this tournament, but might have been something we expected to be 2 low teams battling it out. And the big fantasy takeaway from me is Chicago is someone I am much more interested in than at the beginning of this year. They did not win this game. They were outscored 0-2, Vancouver, at the end, which, shocker, right there. Goals came from Reyna with Adnan as the assist, and then the Yome. I don't even watch Vancouver. I'm sorry. With Jordi Reyna assisting again. But the MVP of this game was weather. That is definitely it. Chicago was on the advantage, just on the attack at the beginning. Then they had like an hour weather delay, and then it was Vancouver after that. So kudos to Vancouver, and kudos to Anna, who we interact with on Twitter, to your guys for doing well. But This was just wild. Chicago outshot Vancouver 27-4, outcrossed Vancouver 37-4, not as bad as the Cincinnati game, and outpossessed Vancouver 61-39. So there's some massive potential fantasy-wise with Chicago. A lot of their players have a lot of value. Medron is one of the top players coming out of this tournament to keep an eye on. He's a midfielder, 7.6, has had some great numbers, some shot numbers, some key pass numbers, some cross numbers, so keep an eye on that. Frankowski is another one that we can remember from last year. He's 6.4. Jimenez, 6.1, did well in this game and throughout this tournament. So there's a lot of guys that a lot of us don't know who they are because a lot of these players are new, but there's definite potential with Chicago, so don't sleep on them like a lot of us probably advising at the beginning of the season. Mike, is this your takeaway from this game as well?
Yeah, pretty much. I mean, Chicago had 1.94 expected goals. This was the beginning of the Hasal show, although it didn't get the attention, mostly because of the way, and you mentioned the weather, and that was exactly right. If you look at the game flow chart of the expected goals, Vancouver did absolutely nothing until the weather delay, and then there's those two huge chances, and that was pretty much it. They had a total of one expected goal, and pretty much most of it came off those two chances. I think they had one other chance that contributed a little bit to their expected goals, but that was about it. This was a team that struggled to score, and it really kind of seemed to me that Chicago was like, there's no way they can score two, and they were just kind of taking it easy. If we get a draw, that's fine. We'll get one past them at some point, but regardless, we're not losing 2-0, and they fell asleep coming off that rain delay, and that was it. So I still think the same about Vancouver going forward. Even with the clean sheets, they're just generating way too many quality shots. I mean, for them to be fantasy viable going forward, they need to have Hasal continue to be one of the best goalkeepers ever, and just eventually he's going to come back to earth. Even if he plays really, really well, you just can't take that kind of bombardment on a weekly basis and keep clean sheets. So, and they really need to do something more offensively. But I agree with you. Chicago's much more interesting to me going forward now.
Yeah. Anything to add, Blaine?
No, I watched this game up until the rain delay, and I was working, so I just turned it off.
And you fell asleep.
They said it could be a couple hours, and then I didn't come back, and I saw the final score, and
Shocker.
Yordi Reyna is one of those players I always keep my eye on. He's good for a few of these. He had a goal and assist. I mean, he's good for a few of these every so often, depending on who they're playing. But he's so hard to predict. It's tough, but it is nice to see him get the scores like this.
Yeah, Reyna and Ali Adnan are pretty much the only fantasy viable players if you wanted somebody. But I don't advise looking at Vancouver, but they get points. Next, LA Galaxy versus Houston. This was a fun game as well. Final was 1-1,
Yes, it was.
A draw, much to Mike's pleasure, and that PK goal from Pavone at the end, near the end of the game, let Mike advance. So Mike was very happy with this. Quintero got the other goal. Basic takeaway from this game is the Galaxy have nothing, and Houston's okay. I mean, that's what I came in. The problem, as I said at the beginning of the show with Houston, is they still have this awesome lineup of goal scorers, and you don't know who's going to score, and it's very frustrating. The one person you probably can rely on is Memo, and we'll talk about him in a second. Otherwise, LA outshot Houston 14-12, outcrossed Houston 34-11, and outpossessed Houston 64-36, and they could still do nothing. No Chicharito, no Dos Santos, but still, LA is a huge struggle bus, and I do not want anything to do with him fantasy-wise. Pavone, Leggett, and Zubac did okay. Nice to see Leggett back up there. He's had some injuries recovering from, so that is a bright spot for the national team to see. Maybe he's on an upswing. On Houston, though, Memo Rodriguez is a standout from this tournament. If you have not keyed onto him yet with fantasy, I don't know where you've been the last 2 years where we've been talking about him, but definitely a player to keep an eye on. Otherwise, usual suspects here: Manotas, Quintero, Elise, Lundqvist in the back on defense, Cabrera in the back defensively, but you're probably not going to want to go for that with Houston. Mostly it's going to be Memo. Anything to add to this one, guys?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the. I mean, I was watching, this game as a New York City fan, just like, just please draw. Come on, guys, let's just get something here. And but most of the game was Sebastian Lletget passing to an LA Galaxy player who didn't read his run, and then Sebastian Lletget just being frustrated and throwing his arms in the air. So I was simultaneously throwing my arms in the air, being like, "What? Come on! Like, this is the Houston defense." And they could do nothing. They were just absolutely discombobulated. If there had been if after the group stage was over, if you'd asked me which coach was going to get fired, I wouldn't have picked Atlanta. I'd have picked this one. I mean, it's just they have. It's just absolutely discombobulated. They have no plan. They didn't have a plan all of last year, and they had a bad plan last year, and they just could get nothing going in this game. They got absolutely bailed out by PK call. I was just, well, we're done until that call, because I had no confidence in the Galaxy scoring. It was so, but even after that, when they had a 2-on-1 situation, I was like, I still knew that they weren't going to score, and they didn't score because they couldn't string two passes together to, just bank it into a wide open net. I think they need signings and a new coach.
Yeah.
Pavone, for the PKs, but yeah, as of right now, it's really hard to justify going in against a Galaxy.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm surprised Pavone hasn't requested a transfer yet this summer.
Oh, well, he doesn't need to. His loan is about to expire. That's
there we
why.
go.
Yeah.
That was the other thing to mention on him.
And we
Good
talk
call.
about how bad this is for the Galaxy, and an old school fantasy favorite being Sasha Kleshkin couldn't even get a sighting in this game. Like, they don't sub him in. I always thought Kleshkin was more of a product of the Red Bull system, and that's where a lot of his points came, and that's why I overlooked him a little too much. But I overlooked a lot of the points he got at Red Bulls to my detriment. But anybody who's done that on a team that is having this much trouble creating has to be given an opportunity to play. I don't care if he is absolute garbage at this point, and my initial impressions of him were correct. When you cannot buy a goal from regular play except when you're up a man, you have to try something, and a player of the caliber of Sasha Kleshkin has to be given an opportunity to make a difference in one of these games. They scored in the 91st minute off of PK. They went down a goal. They needed to win that game to advance, to even have a hope of advancing. And Kleshkin doesn't make an appearance when the other guys aren't doing enough to get the job done. Something is wrong in LA. Chicharito is not going to fix this. Jonathan Dos Santos may shore up the defense a little bit. They may be able to hold up a little better, but there's nowhere that goals are coming from on this team. Pavone cannot do it all. And really, teams can double on Pavone and make somebody else beat him, and they can't beat him. They can't find Lletget streaking in the box. They can't find any open man. There's nothing going. I think it's time for management or tactics change here. And Schelotto is not supposed to be a bad manager. I don't know what's going on, but something's got to change here, or Galaxy, who have 5 cups, are going to become irrelevant and basement dwellers in the very near future.
I just want to second that, because I was watching. It was just like, I saw Sasha Kleshkin on the sideline. Like, all right, this is the opportunity for Sasha, because they need, I think, 3 goals to advance. I don't remember if it was 3 or 4 goals, in order to overcome their really bad goal differential. But regardless, they want to get the 3 points for the regular season. And if regardless of what you think about Sasha Kleshkin, if he isn't going to come in that situation, what situation is he going to come in? Why do you have him on the team? I just didn't understand.
And again, you have 5 subs right now. They use 3, so it's not like they ran out of subs and tried somebody different.
I think he'd be doing that all tournament. I think he used 3 subs. It was as because someone wrote an article about it, as if he didn't understand that the rules had changed.
The final game that we have is LAFC versus Portland. Before we get into that game, I gave a shout out to Anna a second ago from Vancouver. I'm also going to give a shout out to Amanda from Vancouver, who frequently likes and retweets the messages about the podcast. And I know a while back Weeby insulted the Vancouver fans, and I want to thank our Vancouver fans for what they have done, even though your team is not always fantasy viable. I'm sorry, but we are not trying to slight you. So I'm going to give a shout out to Amanda and Anna because they've been great followers on Twitter. But back to the final game, LAFC versus Portland. I loved this game for similar reasons that Mike loved our last game, because with this draw, 2-2 draw was the final score. That made Portland the number 1 team in Group F, which meant the winner of Group F played the second place team in Group E, which was Cincinnati, and so we were playing Portland and not LAFC. So that was good. I appreciated that. That was good. Goals came from Nezguda. You guys, I don't know. Jaroslav
Why are you
Nezguda?
looking at me for help?
I don't know. That's at Portland. Blanco and Loria assisted, and then Ebobisi with an assist by Tulioma. Right there. Goals for LAFC: Bradley Wright Phillips assisted by Blessing, and then Kay assisted by Rodriguez. So that's where they came from. Valeri did not start this game. That's a key thing to know. He did come in, and when he came in, he got some great points. He would have gotten a couple of bonus points from coming off the bench. So quality Valeri, as we expect. This was a strong game, even when Portland didn't put out their A lineup. So that's a good thing to take fantasy-wise. The problem, fantasy-wise, with both of these teams is that they can be real expensive. So you've got quality players who put up quality points, and they can be expensive and not great options all the time with your budget. Portland does have some value on defense if they end up going with a lot of these guys. Tulioma and Zuparik were a couple of guys who have been starting and are under 7. Zuparik 6.9, Tulioma's 5. Farfan's also done well. He's 4.5. So if some of these guys keep playing, it might work out. Stats-wise, though, LAFC outshot Portland 19-7, outcrossed Portland 15-9, and outpossessed Portland 63-37. So key players at LAFC, the usual suspects. Atuesta did well. Kay did well. Bradley Wright Phillips did well. These are all guys that we know and are already looking at fantasy. So nothing new here, but I appreciated this draw so much. So much. What'd you guys think of this one?
Just that LAFC is going to have a real hard or embarrassment of riches trying to figure out what to do when they have Vela back. I mean, he looks absolutely invigorated being on an LAFC. It just seems like a great situation. We all know he's a dangerous goal scorer. As a New York City fan, I've seen him score way too many times. So it's with 5 subs, it's going to give Bradley a lot of options to change games, but there's so many attacking riches. I think we have an issue as fantasy players of they're all expensive, they're all so good, so Bradley can kind of switch them on and off at will, and you don't know where it's going to come from in the game, but they're all really good. It's going to be quite a puzzle to figure out with LAFC, but this is definitely one of those teams. The first game, they're putting up chances. They seem like they're going to continue the run. They're definitely not as strong defensively as they've been in the past. They didn't give up a whole lot of chances in this one, but the ones they gave up were really high-quality chances. Maybe that'll be fixed with time, but in general, I think their defense needs a little bit of work. But, BWP, what can you say? He's one of the few cheap options, but we'll see what kind of time he's going to get. Yeah. Once Villa comes back.
If they do start rotating some with those 5 subs now, he could be a fantastic super sub to come on that might be worth having on your bench. Blaine?
And see, I'm on the other side of the fence here. I think BWP is going to be your feature. Diamande has been a decent option for this team, but he's never really impressed as the premier forward.
That's fair.
Vela has done a decent job playing up top, but he's still better off out wide. Diego Rossi's the same way, better out wide. I think your odd man out right now is Brian Rodriguez. I'm confident in saying that BWP will be the starting forward for this team when the regular season resumes, and with Vela back, and Rodriguez will be the odd man out. He will be the super sub for a while, and honestly, with the way this team is built and playing, I could see BWP playing for another 5 years in this system. This system is just built for him. As he gets older, he may not be able to run quite as long, but you give him 60 minutes up front and then pull him out every game. You get another forward behind him that can do it. This is a system built to facilitate a guy with his skill set, and it's what Diamande has not been able to do as often. I think BWP scored in all of his game, in all three of the first.
I believe so. Yeah, I think so.
Like that. This team is built to facilitate for a guy like that, and he is a perfect fit. The interesting part will be watching the transfer window this summer, and as we head into European season. Rossi was slated to be sold, and I can't remember whether it was Kay or Atuesta. One of those two, I think, was heavy on the trade block or on the sale block. They are looking at shipping 2 guys out to Europe, and I know Rossi is one of them because they're going to be able to turn a really good profit here. But I think the business side of the game was dead set on these guys, on 2 guys being sold to Europe. It may not happen this summer because of the virus issues and teams not being able to work out players. There's been some hiccups from that, so it may be in the off season. But that is definitely going to be something to keep an eye on here. But again, this is a wealth of riches in this team. I trust a lot of these guys. If Kay goes out, Atuesta's there to step up. Blessing has been a huge creative force for this team. There's too many options. If you lose Rossi on the wing, you've got Brian Rodriguez, who got 5 shots in this game. There's so much going forward. We'll have to watch it, but the biggest takeaway I have is I think BWP is legit. He may only get 60 minutes, but this team is going to give him service every game. And I think 1 goal a game for him is not out of the question at all.
Well, that's all that we have for the show tonight. I hope you've enjoyed this recap of the group stage. We'll be doing the same thing in our next episode, except we'll be focusing on the knockout stage and the quarterfinals. So we're going to talk about the Sweet 16 and the quarterfinals because all of those games will wrap up before our next podcast. So we'll cover the results there, and we'll be able to talk about the semis after that. So we're getting close to the end of this tournament, and with hope, once we find out more, we'll be able to give you more information about the return of the official fantasy game. Any closing comments, guys? Mike?
Nope. I'm just glad that my team is still in it.
Blaine?
Yeah, I really have enjoyed this tournament. It's been fun. It's been exciting all the way through. A lot of the games have either been entertaining or close games, good competitive games, and the ones that haven't been as competitive have been full of highlight reel plays like the LAFC, LA Galaxy game that just the wheels fell off, and we at least got to see a ton of goals before it was over. I really have enjoyed this tournament. I'm glad that MLS got the bubble set up in a way that we haven't really heard anything about the virus coming out of there after they got the few cases cleaned up. And major props to MLS for getting this done and bringing us some soccer to get us through, even if the regular season return is a little bit delayed because of trying to get everything scheduled for home games.
Now get a scarf.
Sorry.
Yeah. Now get a scarf because I want a scarf.
I would love a scarf. Yeah.
For this tournament, exactly. Disney one.
No. Really well done tournament, and I'm glad that it's been entertaining. The players seem to have bought into it. Only a few of them that didn't show up, and everyone I've heard had legit personal reasons for not being here. And so I'm just really thankful for MLS for getting this to us and getting it done in a way that kept the players safe too.
Yeah, it's been a lot of fun, Mike.
I was just going to say that it seems that they bought in the beginning. I had some questions, but it seems like in the end they bought in. We've gotten a lot of entertaining games. And absolutely, it's been a lot safer once the bubble was created. It seems MLS did its job. to date, fingers crossed that everything continues to go well. The NBA has had similar success. It's kind of concerning that MLB has not had similar success with a plan that MLS was kind of looking to emulate and hope to do well. So we will see what decisions MLS has to make going forward to get more soccer. I do not envy them for the path that they need to create, and what they have to try to balance out. Because we've asked so much of the players already to be in this bubble for a month. I know it was widely shared on social media, the video of Bo coming back and seeing his daughter again, and being away from your families for a month is a very tough thing to ask of players. So I'm glad that at least if they've made those sacrifices, that we've gotten some great soccer to kind of give us something different to talk about other than the depressing realities of 2020.
Yeah, ditto everything these guys said. It's been great. So excited to be able to share this with everyone that's been listening to us, and with these guys right here. With hope it's going to be just as exciting. As of right now of this recording, I can happily say that all three of our teams are still in this tournament, and that's a great thing to be able to say. But we'll see what tomorrow brings. But I don't know. It's been great. I'm glad it's working, and I can't wait for fantasy to come back. So thank you, everyone, for listening to us tonight, and good luck.